I'm Dave Steenstra from Burt Lake Preservation Association. Well, welcome to all of you. I don't know if we'll go a whole hour. That depends on you guys. The interaction, the questions, this sort of a thing. So I'm really going to rely on a lot of back and forth here. We moved up here, well, first of all, I started fishing up here 50 some years ago. It was just unbelievable. My dad would be working and he'd say, let's go to Burt Lake. And when he said that, there was a gleam in his eye, kind of like kids today are saying, let's go to Disneyland. We would come up here. Now that was even before there was good roads to get here. We'd come up to Burt Lake and we fished over where the Crooked River dumps in. And there used to be a place there called Scotty's. He rented out cottages. And he had a fish cleaning station. And there he had two big sturgeon heads mounted right at this fish cleaning station. And it was so intriguing. So over the years, I became acquainted with the type of species that exist in this watershed. And I've always had a major interest in sturgeon. Well, we were very fortunate 20 years ago or so to be able to buy a home on Burt Lake. So for the last 20 years we've been living on Burt Lake, and it wasn't too long after we bought that home that my number 2 son fell in love with one of the members here today, Brenda. And he says, Dad, you got to meet Brenda Archambault. She is just an incredible person, full of knowledge and spunk. And so it wasn't, I don't know, maybe the next year or so, we got involved in the sturgeon guarding program. You must have been the Sturgeon General about 1 year at that point, maybe 2, I don't know, but it was a long time ago. And it was so contagious to see what Sturgeons for Tomorrow did for this whole wonderful species of fish.
Yeah.
So one thing led to another, and for years we've been supporting Sturgeons for Tomorrow. We continue to do that because their cause is more universal than our cause. Our cause really focuses on Burt Lake and in no way usurps or replaces anything SFT does. We just want to know more about what's going on in our lake. And as our own BLPA, that's kind of what we should be doing. So that's what kind of brings us here today. So I'm going to start out by asking a question, a big question. What does the tip do? Now I want you to take a 5,000 foot view. They do a lot of different things, but what is their primary objective?
Water quality.
Okay, that is a perfect answer. Now there's a lot of different attributes and the different contexts of that, but that certainly is their focus. And you guys measure it by testing, monitoring, doing surveys, all these other things to which we have availed our resources to many times over the years. What does BLPA do? Same 5,000 foot view. Water quality. We want to protect and preserve Burt Lake for generations to come. That's our mission statement. Now, how do we do it? Kind of using some of the same things. Lately, we've also used drones and other new high-tech things. But one of the things that we do, we look at the sturgeon. And the sturgeon is certainly indicative of water quality. It's indicative of an environment. It cannot survive just anywhere. And in fact, here in northern Michigan, there's only Burt, Mullet, and Black inland lakes that have sturgeon. That's not totally true because Otsego had some planted there, but natural indigenous sturgeon in these 3 lakes. And to answer your question, it was human, that screwed things up as far as putting in the Alverno Dam. I'm sure that 1,000 years ago, or go back as far as you want to, all of the sturgeon in this watershed were all related and probably had identical DNA or close to it. I don't know if that's still true. I would presume it is, but I don't know that for a fact yet. So anyway, we decided a year ago to study the sturgeon in Burt Lake because it made a lot of sense to us. It's part of our mandate as Burt Lake Preservation Association. Let's see if I can do this. I don't know. I've got every little thing, every little computer has their own little idiosyncrasy, so let's just do this. Can you imagine walking out on the ice and seeing below you a sturgeon swimming?
Is this a local video?
That is Burt Lake.
Last year?
How big is that sturgeon? Do we know?
Big?
I would say probably 5-6 feet, wouldn't you, Brenda?
Probably, yeah.
It's so hard to say. This was taken not too long after first ice. When you have first ice and no snow, it's far more transparent. It's all the snow and changing of temperatures that makes it opaque. So obviously there was enough ice to walk on. But to follow this has gotten 10 million views. It's some huge number. Well, it was on ABC, Good Morning America.
How'd that
The
happen?
population in the Congo is.
I don't know how that happened.
It
So
was
you
posted
wanna-
on
you
Facebook
wanna
and
see
they
what
saw
I
it and they
can
reposted it.
Very good. We're not going to subscribe to that. Very good. They said it was a white sturgeon. It was a lake sturgeon. And we would estimate 5-6 feet, although again, we don't know for sure. Certainly it's indicative that there is a population of sturgeon in Burt Lake. Again, it just gets our interest going. How many? Wouldn't it be fun to have a little better handle on this? So again, it fits right into what we're doing with the Sturgeon Club.
How deep was the water?
Right there, and again, I'm not sure, but I would say shallow, probably 5 feet. You have a handle on that, Brenda? I don't want to keep hitting on you today, but
No, but there was a fella from Sheboygan out fishing with his kids on tip-ups and he just was standing there and it swam by. So I don't know.
right, it's just hard to say. I do know this, that it was last year as well that I had one on my tip-up, and it was in shallow water. And I'm pulling this thing in. You know it's a sturgeon right away. And Jim and I have caught a sturgeon last year, and I said to him immediately, I got a sturgeon on. Well, same thing. It destroyed my tip-up. I got it all the way to the hole, and I knew I couldn't get it in. It's like pulling in a waterlogged log. And it was in shallow water at that time. I don't know. The sturgeon could be in deep water at times and at other times not, but they seem to be liking some attributes about the shallow water, whether they're looking for a food source or what.
What was on your line?
This is a very interesting question. It was a minnow.
Because I thought they were bottom feeders.
They are bottom feeders, and primarily they eat mayflies and insect larvae and this sort of thing. They will eat some fish from time to time, usually unintentionally, although there's been recent evidence that they might have an interest in this goby. So there's more and more research saying,
Ooh, that would be.
And zebra mussels.
right,
Well, you know,
and
that
possibly the
makes sense.
mussels. That's another thing, because they're sucking in, and the mussels come in as they're doing this.
The reason I asked the depth, would they come to the surface when there's ice from deep water, or would they?
Yes, if this, and again, I wish we had a little more information on this. That's a possibility even with this video that you just saw.
Considering that they're bottom feeders, I was just
Right.
surprised that it was that close to the surface.
They are bottom feeders. However, if you ever get one on your line, which we have done from time to time, it's not unusual to see them come up and do a full breach. I've seen it happen. We had one come up next to our boat a couple years ago. It had to have been 6 foot. and it came completely out of the water.
We saw a couple breach last year,
So
last
cool.
summer.
Yep.
Big fish.
It's just
Come
amazing.
all the way out of the water.
Really?
Just
They'll
crazy.
breach?
All the way out of the water.
That would be
Huh.
under stress though, that wouldn't be, if it
Ah.
had a hook in its mouth.
Oh,
Oh.
this was
Oh,
half a
yes,
mile
we've heard
away.
Oh,
I was out fishing and this was half a mile away. Psh, big fish.
So the sturgeon has become one element of our canary in the coal mine. You remember that old story? 100 years ago, the coal miners would take a canary in, and if the canary croaked, they knew it was probably time to get out of here. So it's indicative of the air quality. Well, this has some implications on the water quality, and we're kind of using it in that context as well.
when you say that the mussels, have you found them in their belly and after they've been caught?
Brenda, have you got an answer to
Yeah,
that?
mhm,
You have?
they do eat them.
Do they
There
digest
is-
them, or is it are they sorry they sucked it up?
Well, that I don't know, but
You'd have no focus groups or anything?
yeah, you want to start one?
Yeah, right. Hey, there's an advisory meeting next Thursday night. Come-
Yeah.
I think that would be a plus, but
Right.
then again, maybe they took it in by mistake and
Part of the problem is, we just had a jamboree, you just had the jamboree, the shivaree, out at Black Lake, and there was a dozen sturgeon caught, speared. I would think, well, wasn't there six, and then the tribes had another six?
They're not fishing yet. They have all different
Okay.
rules. and
Well, let's
stuff.
just talk about the six.
Yep.
So, 6 sturgeon were caught. I would presume that autopsies are done, aren't they? Or don't we know?
They're opened up. They've got bilateral gonads, and they're either testes or ovaries to determine the gender of the fish because they don't have external characteristics. But there were some of them that were tagged, so we know that we've tagged them in the river with pit tags. We've tagged them in the spawning run, and some of them weren't tagged. So
Okay, good.
so any of them donated to science or just
they do take a fin sample, especially on the ones that do not have tags, for genetic analysis.
but would a person who caught it be willing to donate it for further study?
I think that there's a reasonable likelihood that if they were asked that could happen.
So I have a controversial question, and I know I've spoken to you before about this when I saw you at a fundraiser, but, and then in finding out that, you know, with that dam, they're no longer able to get in naturally into Black Lake. Why is that allowed them to take even just 5 or 6? Because, you know, we know they live to be, 70 to 100 years. They're prehistoric. They're not going to be naturally coming in any longer. So reproduction, I don't know how long, if it's a slow process for them and if it's the success rate is
Yeah,
for
we'll get
naturally.
into some of those things today, actually.
Okay, but why do they do that?
You
The-
mean
the
allow for
spearing.
harvest?
Yeah.
Well, let's take an analogy of a bank account. You've got your principal and your interest. Your principal is your brood stock, your minimum viable size, and scientifically that number is set at 750 breeding adults. We are estimated to have 11 to 1300 breeding adults, and so that is your interest. That is the part where your management comes in.
So there is that many.
Right, but we net tag, collect drifting larvae, rear them in a nearby hatchery, and then stock them back in the lake. So we are supplementing the population, so we have year classes of fish. And that's where that part comes in, but there's also the human dimension side of management that was heard in Lansing 20 years ago because the sturgeon are very deeply entrenched in our local culture around the lakes. So, but I'd love to have a conversation with
Okay.
you someday. Yeah.
These are great questions, you know, and I
Mhm.
was envisioning this type of interaction, so this is very good.
Is the Alverno Dam ever going to be removed?
Well, now you gotta, you talk about.
There's that
This is
controversial
Yeah,
question.
That's right.
And should they remove the locks in Sheboygan? Let's throw that in with the same
Oh,
question.
wow, yeah.
You know, there was a time when everything was free flowing back and forth.
Yep.
And really, to be even more controversial, I always ask the question, when you transplant sturgeon into Burt and Mullet Lake, are they going to reproduce? Will they assimilate? Or are they going to try to go all the way back to the Alverno Dam? A lot of species, fish in particular, do that. Salmon go back to where they're born. So there's a lot of questions to be asked, and some of them are very controversial. Why don't we have an open season on Burt Lake? We think there's enough sturgeon to do that, but people don't want to step up and say, yeah, maybe there is enough sturgeon.
Are there tribal rights that generate some of the rules?
Tribal rights are in compatibility with the non-tribal rights, so I don't really think that that's an issue.
I'm not complaining. A lot of times their rights help people who want to preserve stuff.
They might.
You know, and another way of looking at this too, one thing that's come out of this collaboration of these diverse interests is that we're getting world-class research coming out of the Upper Black River.
We are.
Wow, yeah.
You know, we're very blessed to have Michigan State University spending a lot of time, especially with Sturgeons for Tomorrow. We've got a student that's likely going to do an internship with us this summer. We're getting close to signing that deal. We've got the University of Michigan that has a world-class biological station here.
Yes.
We keep engaging them. Last summer, we had 3 students do a project on the Black River where the sturgeon in that watershed reproduce. They studied the cobble, they studied the current, the temperature. I mean, it's things that some of us wouldn't think about. How deep down are those stones impressed into the bottom? And it was just amazing what they came up with. Then we took them over the Sturgeon River and we said, why don't you study this and see if you can do a compare contrast. Regrettably, the day we took them to the Sturgeon River, we had just had 4 straight days of rain, so it was flowing a little fast.
But still, they're onto some really amazing research.
Amazing stuff. That's going to be very helpful.
That we've been fortunate to hopefully club this summer to have UMBS do a copy exact of that research on sturgeon habitat to match up against the Upper Black River and against the Sturgeon River, so that we're looking within the whole watershed to say, are there compatible areas that will be spawn potential sites?
Did you mean the Pigeon River?
Yeah, I'm
Not
sorry.
the pigeon.
Yeah.
I did an indication
I
too.
thought you.
No, this is great.
It's the head cold.
This is wonderful.
was
So, would
random.
you mind scrolling?
I'll let you finish. I'll let you finish.
It's all right. So we created a mission for our club that says to preserve, protect, and promote the natural growth. Now this is key. This does not replace or usurp anything being done by Sturgeons for Tomorrow. We're big supporters of that. We just want to know more about the sturgeon that are already there. The indigenous lake sturgeon in Burt Lake. And we could get into some real arguments whether or not they're indigenous or not. But we're going to start at this point anyway. We think a sturgeon that is probably 40 some inches long is likely to be indigenous. There is some debate on that. We've already gotten into it with the DNR, but we think those are probably naturally reproduced sturgeon. If we started putting sturgeon into Burt Lake 12 years ago, which I think is the number, I mean, you can correct me on this, Brenda, but
I've said enough.
okay, but I think that's probably the right number. About 12 years ago, every year we put some sturgeon into Burt Lake from the Black Lake nursery, the hatchery. That number is about 10 to 12,000 fish by now, some number like that. We don't know how many of them made it, how the mortality is. I've seen a lot of reports that say half of them might make it. I've seen others that say maybe 10%, but they got a good start because they're pretty good size. And not every fish likes sturgeon from an eating standpoint, so maybe a number of them made it. but in that short period of time, they're not going to grow to be 40 pounds. So if you get a 40-pound sturgeon, I think those are original indigenous sturgeon. That's just my opinion, and I think there's a lot of support for that. So that's really what we want to focus on. What are their habits? What is their typical MO? We would love to have, what is it, telepathy, isn't it? Telemetry.
Oh, yeah, radio telemetry.
Right. We would like to have that if that was at all possible, so that we could help learn more about the movement of these sturgeon, their migration, where do they spawn, how do they spawn. Again, putting 500 or 1,000 sturgeon in every year, and we've always been supportive of that and put our money where our mouth is on that. If we can get one big female to reproduce, and it takes, you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of thousands of potential eggs just from one fish. Now I'm jumping around a little bit. One of the great fears that we have today didn't exist years ago. Caviar and smuggling sturgeon on the black market. We haven't even begun to approach this, although I guess we kind of did. We have begun. We've had conversations with the Coast Guard Special Unit, who actually are monitoring movements of Eastern European people who are poaching and stealing sturgeon. Now, Brenda's had a head up on this for years with the Sturgeon Guard. We may have to do that on Mullet and Burt Lake too, as we learn more. We're not sure where they're reproducing now. We think in the Sturgeon River, but we don't know that for a fact. So it's very possible that there's poaching going on by the Russians even as we speak. I don't really want to throw the Russians under the bus, because it could be any number of
I think they're part of it.
Oh, they are. I have no doubt.
So how do they arrive and leave with all this caviar?
It's amazing. They've got trunks and networks that is just, you can't believe. And the value of one female sturgeon could be $100,000.
I've heard of it, yeah.
That's just amazing.
It is amazing. And Brenda mentioned earlier about the culture at Black Lake, and it is. I mean, this is a huge element of their culture. I've worked in Russia quite a few times, and part of their culture is caviar and vodka. So, I mean, and they have decimated the Beluga sturgeon over in Russia, so they're looking for other sources. And here they are right here. I don't know, stay tuned, more to come on that. We're going to start watching that as part of our mission as well. So there's just a few things here. The fish that inhabit Burt Lake and our watershed, I include mullet and black at that, they're pretty unique to this particular Great Lakes region. They're found nowhere else in the world. There's 27 to 29 different varieties of sturgeon. This one here is quite unique to this general area. So here is the scientific biological name. You want to try it?
I want you to try
No, okay, say it. Okay, that's good.
Good.
Fulvescens. Say it.
Exopenture fulvescens.
Say it again. This might be on the quiz. But just say it.
So pay attention.
First question.
It is. You want to say it again?
Exopenture fulvesens.
Right, very good. They live to be approximately 55 years old. And again, there is a range. It depends on a lot of different things. But that's typical, somewhat typical for a male. The female can make it up to 150 years. Now that's probably at the high reach of it. But certainly there's been some studies and evidence that would say that that's exactly right. They can grow to over 7 foot and 200 pounds. And there's some evidence of that in our watershed. Now some of those records go back a long, long time. I read one piece of research some years back where they took a 7 foot 2 inch sturgeon out of Burt Lake. Now they released it, but it was brought in. Also, around the turn of the century, there was one caught about 200 pounds. And I think the most recent, just before they shut down the season at Mullet Lake, 186 pounds. Jim, is that correct number?
I think Brenda's the one to ask, but you're very close.
That's very close. So, and that was in 1985 or 1986.
189 pounds.
It was
something
just
like that.
crazy. So, but you got the picture. These things can grow to be huge. Burt Lake sturgeon are not considered endangered, but they are on this list where they don't want us to have an open season on them. We don't know how many sturgeon are in Burt Lake. The last report written by the DNR would indicate somewhere around 1,500. Now, if that's true, that's about one fish per 10 acres when you think of it in that perspective. Pretty interesting. They are vulnerable, so if you can scroll just a little bit more. Let's see what's on the next page. So here's some of our objectives as a group. And again, our whole mandate is to focus on Burt Lake because we are Burt Lake Preservation Association. Not that we're snubbing our friends at Mullet. In fact, we formed a great relationship with Mullet, and we're trying to cajole these guys to get on board with our efforts as well. We want to achieve a population of 2,000 natural, indigenous, adult Burt Lake sturgeon. How we even begin to prove all that, but you got to start somewhere with setting some goals. So that's kind of where we're going here. You heard the report that there's about 1,200 to 1,500 in the Black Lake system. Well, I'd like to surpass that. Why not? Set that as our goal. I'll be dead by then, so I won't have to worry about coming back here and facing the music. We want to achieve a natural recruitment level that sustains an adult lake sturgeon population. So what we'd like to be able to do is to encourage them, hey, come on over here and spawn in this area here. Now that's pretty naive, but as we continue to do studies and research and water temperatures and substrata and all this other stuff, we intend to continue to advance that objective. It may take us years to have that happen, but I think that's a very good goal. And at some point, we would like to have a sport fishery. It's amazing how many people I talk to, old timers, they get that same gleam in their eye that my dad used to have when he talked about Burt Lake. I remember when we had a fishery here. You know, if we could just catch 2 or 3 fish, wouldn't that just be something? And they just, it's like they're fantasizing about Disneyland. They get tears in their eyes.
These are the conversations at Mike and Dave's barber shop.
Which is...
They truly are.
They are. It's the center of the
We've had
universe.
many conversations there with the old timers that Dave refers to, and they would really like to be able to do that again.
So we don't know what all that means, but we would like to see a sports fishery. Maybe it's 5 fish, maybe it's 1 fish. It's got to start somewhere, the smallest steps on a big journey. But whatever it is, we don't want it to adversely affect the whole idea of sustainability. Scroll just a little bit more. So we also want to preserve and protect natural spawning habitat and create additional spawning habitat if needed. It's pretty interesting, this past year, the dam was removed on Lake Kathleen. So now you got the Maple River, which is another fantastic 4-star blue ribbon trout stream that it's pretty likely could attract sturgeon. Now, the DNR has said they have seen sturgeon in the Maple River. Jim and I took our time this past year to take a look at the mouth of the Maple River, and I don't know how a minnow could get up there, but you know, apparently, let alone a 6-foot sturgeon.
Yeah, we pretty much got the boat stuck.
We pretty much got the boat stuck. I would certainly like to see us have some discussion, and we're going to with the DNR, on if anything can be done without disrupting the natural flows to accommodate fish especially that want to go up the Maple River to reproduce. We think that could be a great habitat up there. So that's one thing we're going to take a look at. We've been looking at the Sturgeon River. There's a good reason it's called the Sturgeon River. That goes way back. Certainly the sturgeon do like this. We were bequeathed a nice piece of property on the Sturgeon River last year, and because of our mission, we decided we didn't want it. However, we asked the Traverse Conservancy to want it, and could we then use it? So it's a win-win, and a win for those that wanted to bequeath the property from a tax perspective. So we've got a nice chunk of property now. I say we, it's not technically ours, but we'll have...
We're the stewards of it.
We are the stewards of it. We think this could be a spot for us to exploit, and I say that in a positive, friendly manner, to do some research. And again, this coming year, we intend to do some studies down at this area to see once if the water quality is such that it might attract and recruit sturgeon to consider reproducing here. And if not, maybe there's something we can do to help them, like, and it's going to require some approvals, maybe some substrata that would be very helpful for these things.
Considering how long the sturgeon have been around, would they have any characteristics, don't take this literally, but like mud puppies, where like at the Maple River, smaller ones could sort of be land neutral and travel through shallow water?
I was wondering about that when you said that.
Well, yes, and in fact, again, these are questions that we need to continue to find absolute good scientific answers to. I don't have those. I will say this, there's a pretty, don't take this wrong, a pretty decent population. I don't want to even predict what number that is, of sturgeon that reproduce, or at least attempt to reproduce, on the riprap right in Burt Lake. We know that for a fact. We've seen it happen. I don't know if it takes. I certainly would hope it does. But they don't even leave the lake. There's enough rocky shoal in various spots of the lake, and the sturgeon have been going there for thousands of years. That's where they're doing it. So that's another thing that we're going to continue to look at with the spawning habitat. And we're going to continue to gather data in any form and quantity from all stakeholders regarding these indigenous Burt Lake sturgeon. Every time somebody sees a fish, we say, call us, let us know. And it's amazing how many people have done that. It's been pretty interesting. Okay, let's see if there's a few more things. I think that's it here.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Just out of curiosity. How come they are not in Lake Charlevoix, or are they and we just don't know it? And also Elk Lake, since those are both trips to the Lake Michigan.
Right. My hunch is, I don't know about Elk Lake because you got the dam there.
Oh, yeah. You're right.
So there could be some from years ago. I don't know if they're reproducing. Lake Charlevoix does have sturgeon in it. Those are Lake Michigan sturgeon that come in there. I don't know much about the population. Hate to hit on you, Brenda. Do you have any idea on that?
Well, there's people have seen them.
They
Yes.
have?
Yeah.
So there's just no club to protect them or
I'm
promote
not sure
them?
about spawning habitat, nursing habitat, rearing is the big thing
Right.
about them. Because they live in the big
Not
lakes.
Walden.
Not that I'm aware of.
There are some pretty big sturgeon in Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, though. They've certainly had some wash up over the years. So yes, any Muskegon Lake, another classic example. They had a big one last year, 2 years ago. They even named it, but it's connected to Lake Michigan, so certainly they can come and go.
Didn't they just recently find one in the Detroit River of all places?
Oh, that doesn't surprise me. In fact, there is an open season. I have caught sturgeon, quite a few actually over the years, around Algonac, which is south of the Blue Water Bridge
St. Clair
area,
River.
St. Clair River. There's lots of sturgeon. In fact, there's so many sturgeon there, they have an open season. as long as it falls within a certain slot, and I think it's 40 to 48 inches, but it changes every year, so you'd want to check that out. I did read one piece of research that said in that general watershed area right there, there's about 30,000 sturgeon.
I think when you look at the Canadian side of that river, it's very different than the American side.
Yes, yes.
There's just has nothing to do with sturgeon, but Jen maybe can help me. There was a Mrs. Jonas, I think her name was, that did a presentation here.
Yeah, Jory Jonas.
This was like when the icebreakers first started. And she talked about lake trout in Elk Lake, very specific species. And I wish I'd have had pictures of her slides. Somebody was doing a master's thesis, and they graphed the lake trout in different areas, and they found almost like tribal characteristics, the distance from the fin or the eye or something that made them somewhat unique, and they had little dots of yellow or red to show the different species. And it was amazing that in a lake, in that dam again, keeps that particular lake trout sort of penned up, and they did research on climate when the lake inverted. It was a very, very interesting viewpoint. And
It is.
evidently, the only lake trout in Lake Michigan have been planted. There are no natural surviving lake trout. But in the Elk Lake, this particular species is self-sustaining.
Well, it's amazing what we can learn from the inhabitants of a piece of water if we just ask them. And obviously they can't talk back, but they certainly carry a wealth of knowledge that if we can just gather up some of that, oh wow.
I think Randy Claremont, another Jen help, he did a presentation on some research they were doing when they were planting lake trout eggs in the rocks around Elk on the lake side of it. But it's another question. Is there a big difference between the water, the habitat in Black Lake versus like Burt Lake? I mean, temperature, plankton, where you would say that one lake is far superior to the other when it comes to encouraging sturgeon to be happy.
There are differences and there's also similarities. Obviously the size is one difference. The depth, the substrata, there's a lot of compatibilities and there are some differences. What Black Lake really has going for it is the Black River, which is a wonderful spot for the sturgeon to go up. It's very welcoming. It is recruiting, naturally recruiting. That's why these fish are going up there. We don't know if that's true with the Sturgeon River. Do you know for a fact that, let's pick 100 years ago, the Sturgeon River did not dump in where it dumps in now? Did you know that? It dumped in about halfway down between Burt Lake and Howe Marina area, somewhere in there.
Where the Indian River.
Right. So because of logging and this sort of thing, they changed the course of the Sturgeon River. Did that have an impact on sturgeon reproduction? I don't know. It could have. We think that there might have also been other types of fish in there, like such as grayling. We don't know about that, but it's possible. And because of all that what man did once again to the environment, kind of screwed up natural reproduction. So we're not sure.
I mean, something could be so subtle to us that would be
Right.
catastrophic, not
Right.
catastrophic, but
Right.
important to the fish.
Right. How about some other questions before we'll have some more question and answers after we
And
take
I
our
can probably ask
quiz.
my friend afterwards, but when you talk about open season, is it the challenge of catching a sturgeon? Are they good tasting?
Oh, well, okay, you got several questions here. I have had sturgeon. As I said, there's a season on the St. Clair River.
Yes.
We have caught sturgeon. It is delicious. It reminds me a little bit of pork. There are no...
So thick.
Well, it depends on how you cut it
Well,
and stuff,
sure.
but there are no bones in it. It's cartilage. It's part of the shark family, if you will, from that context. It's wonderful. It really, it's great. Open season to me would be, let's have the ability to catch a couple fish. So it doesn't have to be like all year long. It could be a very limited season. Now in Black Lakes, they do it through the ice, spearing. In Burt Lake, I'd like to do it in soft water.
Yeah, hook and line.
Hook and line. You talk
Closely
about,
monitored.
How long would it take to really?
well, this is an interesting question, as Jim and I did it
I
last
can
year.
tell you specifically.
With 6-pound test line, it took us at least a half an hour. Let's just say a half an hour.
Okay.
Yeah, we were jigging for walleyes, and I caught a sturgeon. Now, I didn't catch the sturgeon, I snagged the sturgeon. Just happened, it was kind of interested in my lure, obviously, because it was right in that area. But anyway, about a half an hour to bring this thing in. Jim got it in the net, and he turned to me, he says, "You better get over here, because I can't lift this thing out of the water." True story.
Yeah, it took both of us to put it into the boat.
Did you get a picture?
You know, I'm
Oh, yeah.
certainly new to this
I'll
compared
show it
to
to you It's afterwards. I got it right here.
most of the people in this room, and maybe that gives me a different perspective, but I was involved with the Black Lake Chivalry this year for the first time. And what struck me was how deeply culturally embedded it is in that community. And so you have hundreds of people getting together to fish for 6 fish in a season that lasts an hour and 17 minutes.
With your
And
literature?
in a strange way, it's about the fish, but it's about the community. And then the Indians are
Camaraderie.
involved, and having ceremonies to honor the fish, and it's a very culturally significant thing. And it really was interesting to me to see it from that perspective.
And to just further the answer to your question about an open season, one of the things that an open season would bring is increased awareness of the sturgeon. And as awareness increases, support increases. So it's all good.
So the teacher didn't tell us some of these things.
Yeah, the sensory.
Well, because at this level, you should be seeking your own stuff.
You remembered.
I gotta tell you, I want to just follow up on what Jim just said.
Let's do it together.
Yeah.
I want to follow up on what Jim
the
just
name of
said.
it.
Hang on. Jim said that we have so much more to learn, essentially. I'm just rephrasing what you said. Our presentation today is about 1% on a scale of 0 to 100. There is so much that we need to find out, and that's the exciting thing. This is going to be a journey that'll never end. So let's find out how well you listen. What?
Go ahead. I'll ask later.
Well, no, you've got to stand up and accept. Right. So, what is the biological name of the lake sturgeon?
Do you have a pen?
Very good. All right. I think everybody got that right.
Oh, I don't know.
So, everybody gets a
You got
kiss.
a bell.
Yes, everybody gets a kiss on this.
I made fun of it before.
Yes, of course I got a bell. Don't you remember that in 3rd grade, your teacher?
That's going back a ways.
Well, I'm pretty old, Jim, so, you know.
Thank you,
Okay,
Professor.
yes, right. Very good. You listened well, grasshoppers. So next, the lake sturgeon has 4 purely sensory organs that look like whiskers that dangle near its mouth. Brenda, you can't answer these. What are these called?
Barbels.
Very good.
More
How do you
candy.
spell?
Cover that, Professor.
I didn't, but you know what? You see, this is the thing.
B-A-R-E-L-S.
You're gonna get to, now how did you know the answer to that?
Just because. I don't know. I know that. I mean, that's like other fish have that.
Somebody else said barbels.
Yeah, I heard someone in the back.
I thought somebody else in the back. Just think of barbells. It's very similar to that. But they do help them locate food, obviously in larvae. Barbels is the answer. Very good. So now, there's a lot of latitude in this one, and I did not cover the barbels. That's why we're taking this quiz. Lake sturgeon can grow to a relatively large size, up to...
7.
Very good, okay. We'll hand out some more. And how much in weight?
200.
Very good. And actually, there's a range on that too. I even put down 240 pounds, so it depends. Very good, this is good. You're not writing anything down. This is very upsetting.
He just knows it, right, David?
There's a pen right in front of you, write it down. No. I'm tough on my students, I'm telling you that. So, lake sturgeon are bottom feeders. Their lips looks like a vacuum hose. What is this called?
Non-kissable.
All right, I got you on this one. Prehensile.
Oh.
Prehensile. Prehensile.
That's what insects have then, too.
Some do, sure.
Monkeys have a prehensile.
Suckers,
Oh, yeah, that's what I think.
carp. This is very pronounced, obviously. Prehensile. See, now we didn't cover that, but this is part of your application exercise. The lake sturgeon diet consists primarily of
Insects.
insect larvae. Very good. Sometimes also fish, but it's rarely found in its diet. It's incidental, with the exception of gobies, yes, and mussel. So it'll be interesting to see once how that research pans out going forward over the next little bit. Lake sturgeon have a very long lifespan. Males can live up to
Fish are really
55, very good. Females can live up to,
100.
very
You
good.
guys are rocking it.
You're not writing down your answers, Gail. No, I've got more. I brought extras, so there's not a problem. I love being a college professor. I can do this kind of stuff, you know. No, I'm not ever going to retire. Why should I?
That's how gobies are spelled.
Here's one that we didn't cover as well today. Sturgeon, you know what? We probably should put this up. Sturgeon reach sexual maturity at approximately what age? Males?
17?
Oh, there's more on
That's a
the
good number. I'd give you full credit for that. It's a range. So a male is not sexually active until they're 10 years old, up to about 22, at least the report I read. And 20, 17, we're not going to argue about that, but just to give you an idea, 20 maybe is just a good ballpark. Females are not sexually active until they are
25.
That's a great number. The range, once again, in this report was 14 to 33, and they said 24, 25 is a great benchmark.
But they can live to 155.
They can. But just think about it. It takes that long for a sturgeon to become sexually active. Here's the rest of it. They spawn on clean gravel shoals, stream rapids. The approximate dates in Burt Lake for spawning are...
Mother's Day.
That's perfect. In fact, it all depends on the temperature of the water, but that's a great benchmark. May 15, probably until the end of June. But in that 6-week time period. And there's some disagreement about what the water temperature should be. Certainly this particular report said about 55 degrees. Would you concur with that, Brenda? Okay.
So what's the range?
Well, 64 was the high end. I had some problems with that one, but that's what this report said.
So 55 to 60.
Right. A female sturgeon can lay up to how many eggs? 1 million. Now that's a big sturgeon, but it is possible. And at least one of those studies I read, 120-pound sturgeon, there could be 40 pounds of eggs. A third of her body weight could
Wow.
be eggs. Think about it.
So they really can be 1 million eggs?
Yes. Right.
Per season, not in their lifetime.
No, just this one time.
Yeah.
Per season, that's a good way to do it, not per year, because their season, this is the next question. Males spawn every 2 to 7 years, and maybe 4 is a good, reasonable benchmark. So they become sexually active, but they don't practice sex once every 4 years, or something like that. And females, about the same thing, although they could be 4 years to as long as 9 years before they are sexually active, before they spawn. And the last thing, and I know I mentioned this, how many adult lake sturgeon are in Burt Lake? Somewhere around 1,500. At least according to Neil Godby, so we're going to put him on for this one.
And black was about 1,200, you're thinking?
Wow.
Heavy 1100, but
What,
Mullet?
but Black Lakes, these are adults that you're talking about here. And I don't think that we're talking apples to apples here in Neil's report. We don't have as nearly as many sturgeon in Burt Lake as they have in Black Lake.
Do they do any, so I'm just thinking for a fundraiser, because I certainly would go on it, any tours on any of your lakes? 'Cause I don't have boat access to those lakes to try to see sturgeon, whether they're,
Good
during the
question. Let me give you
spawning
2 good answers. You should hook up with Brenda.
Yeah.
But seriously, and do the tour of the hatchery and stuff like that over on
That's
Black.
fascinating.
You should kind of keep your eyes open, and it's gonna, you gotta be flexible, because when it's now, it's now. If you go to the old Camelback Bridge, which has been replaced with a new bridge, over Indian River,
Oh.
and look down at the water right behind the in-between on Mother's Day,
Okay,
your odds are pretty good.
really?
You can see them spawning there.
No, it might be May 10, maybe May 20, but that's where you're gonna see them. That is at least one location.
You might like the Indian ceremony in August too, when they put the sturgeon in the Sturgeon River.
Oh, that would be
Yes.
fun.
And they have
Yeah.
little kids putting them in, and they also, we do a little bit on mullet, but the Indian ceremony, you might.
And that's in
really-
August?
Yeah, middle of August.
And then,
Little Traverse Bay Band rear sturgeon from Black Lake at their hatchery north of Houston. And it's usually in August when they do that. It's
I'll
quite
give you extra
something.
copies of the quiz, so you get
It's neat.
it'd be so cool to see.
Little kids putting them in, and they talk about the significance of the sturgeon in their whole culture. I mean, sturgeon were a big deal to those Indians.
But on May 11th, I'll be doing a guided sturgeon viewing and hatchery tour.
May 11th.
Yeah.
May 11th, and you can sign up online.
Really interesting.
But hang on.
All right, I know you gave me your number before, but I think I lost it.
We just need to go have coffee.
Sure.
We need
Okay,
to
the
just-
last thing I'm handing out is our little trifold. It's what you just saw. But each one of you will get free a little Burt Lake Sturgeon Club decal that you can put proudly on your back window. There it is, right there.
The tour.
So how about some other comments or questions?
I just think you're the most
I haven't looked
amazing
at that
fit.
form in a while. Is there an area for information
Bring
so
your
that
waiters and
everybody
get
can
your
join the
hands on
club?
something.
They can make contact to Burt Lake Preservation Association.
I would strongly
Bucket list.
recommend it. Log on
And
to blpa.org
Where do you live?
Brave
and
Petoskey.
we'll sign you up for a
Put your
free membership.
information on here for me. Okay.
And we can keep you in the loop as to what we're doing. And, you know, Marty, that was an interesting thing that you just talked about, the planting of the sturgeon in the fall. There's no reason why we can't keep our members apprised of goings-on such as that.
Yep, absolutely.
So I strongly encourage you to log on to blpa.org, sign up, it's free.
This is just one more thing that we can do as responsible stewards to help create an awareness. You know, it begins with awareness. What we looked at today is a small thimble in the big pool of knowledge, but it's a start. And we're creating an awareness, and hopefully some other people are going to get involved in this. That's what we're trying to do.
On question 10, the spawning, does the female just develop the eggs in one season, or is it developed over more than one
I don't
season?
know. I'll have to find the answer out.
It takes 4 to 7 years for them to rejuvenate. So like, average of 20 years old, right? Females are 17 to 30, and once they become mature and they spawn, it takes 7 years for them to recharge.
What do you mean by recharge?
For them to be able to spawn again. It's called staging, sexing and staging.
Wow.
And you had talked about female, how many eggs? They can carry 5,000 eggs per pound of body weight pre-spawn. Yeah, that's a lot. And they're on an average 150 pounds. 150.
But do all those eggs
Isn't that
grow
amazing?
in like one season and then, or are they growing over a period of time, over more than one season?
Well, they come in different groups to spawn. It's not just one big congregation. There's usually early, mid, late spawners, which is good for genetic diversity. But about 8 to 10 days after these eggs are hatched on clean substrate, non-silted, which is really important, about 8 to 10 days after they spawn, the eggs will hatch and begin to drift. And that's when we collect the drifting larvae. They still have the yolk sac, and then they're taken back to the hatchery for rearing, either at Black Lake, Streamside, or for Burt Lake stocking, Little Traverse Bay Band of Odawa Indians. They raise the Burt Lake stock at their hatchery.
And those two aren't mixed, relatively speaking?
Well, it's the same brood stock.
Yeah, it's the same source.
Mhm.
So,
Good questions.
The number that you, the target you want for 2050, so do you know what the carrying capacity of Burt Lake would be? Is that based on
It's
that?
a great question, and one that I think Sturgeons for Tomorrow has to start asking heavier too. How many is enough? And the reason we chose that number is because we read the Black Lake Sturgeon Plan.
Sure.
And we said, all right, Black Lake is 10,000 acres, we're 17,000 acres. Seems to me, mathematically, we should be able to accommodate 2,000. That's exactly where we got our number from.
Yeah, and until you put a number out there, you can't refute it. So let's start with what we
Right.
consider to be a logical number,
Right.
and let's start the dialogue.
Right. And we'll take it from there.
Has Neil Godby kind of validated that number, or do you, or haven't done that?
It's a work in process.
And Neil's aware of this conversation.
Yeah.
Right,
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
right, right.
So I know you've been talking about, like, obviously the first step is awareness, and like a recreational sports fishing industry would create that awareness. Do you think that there's like a lot of open water, like sports fishing industry, aside from just going out for pleasure for sturgeon as it stands, or like, I mean, really any fish on Burt, like the smaller inland lakes?
Well, it's, again, it depends on where you stand. To me, I can go bluegill fishing anywhere,
Right.
but I can't go sturgeon fishing anywhere. So there's a very special, unique attractiveness that this has. I don't know, this is a great question. I've already approached one expert and I said, look, if we could ever get to a point of having even a catch and release open season, would you be willing to put on a workshop for us? He said, yes, I would. Now, when we fish for sturgeon down in Algonac, there's a hook about the size of your finger that you just put a gob of crawlers on there. We go out at midnight, go right down to the middle of the river, 40 feet of water, set your drag very tentatively so that the current is hardly taking your drag at all. Click. And then maybe 15 seconds later, click. And then all of a sudden it'll start going click, 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 click. You got a sturgeon. I don't think it's gonna be the same technique in Burt or Mullet Lake. But, again, this is maybe part of our learning process.
Sure. Who was the gentleman you spoke with?
Ken Clark.
Okay.
He fishes Burt Lake. He's very familiar with this area. He's caught a lot of sturgeon. In fact, he caught one this fall. He's in our latest newsletter.
He is.
You guys get the newsletter
Yeah,
here.
we just got it, yep.
Just take a look. You'll see a picture of Ken Clark in it.
Ken's there holding sturgeon.
He's holding what was it, a 40-incher, I think.
I think so.
Great questions. How about some more?
Can you help me understand a little more about the Odawa cultural connection with sturgeon?
I don't know all the particulars, except it's a revered event.
Creature.
Yes.
I can
Yeah.
answer that. I don't know who this
Sure.
is, but I used to work there for 7 years. So sturgeon is actually a clan for the tribe. So a lot of people, feel like a kinship to it, and so a lot of people actually would not eat it because you would not eat your own clan. The harvest that the tribe usually gets, I can't remember how many permits they get a year, but usually if you catch a sturgeon, you're not really going to keep it to yourself. You would share it at some sort of big feast with other, wild game and other local stuff like that. So those are the couple things I know. I mean, a lot of people do think it's sacred and
And this would
ancient.
go back.
And it would go back to, their creation story.
You really might like to go to the ceremony. They have
We should do that in
It is
August.
pretty cool.
really welcoming,
Our
and
next fun
they
day.
go into great length about where the sturgeon lies in their culture.
Yeah.
They have a really nice potluck, and they're really, it's a really moving ceremony, and they have the
It was in
kids.
Wolverine this year, wasn't it?
It was,
last
yes.
couple of years.
yeah.
Right.
How would you
Make
find
sure,
out
Dave,
about that?
we
Like the details?
Announce
communicate
it.
that information.
Yes, we'll announce that.
And go to the
Our Facebook page.
Other comments,
Oh,
questions, anyone? Well, hey, listen, we kept you
One more real
overtime
quick
here.
one.
Yes.
So the poaching with the eggs, caviar, are they using drones at all, I'm hoping to, and is that taking place in Burt Lake and Mullet and Black Lake, the poaching as well, or is it just the Great Lakes, or don't we know?
We don't have all the information we need, but there's no question in my mind that poaching is occurring in the inland waterways. This is one of the reasons that the Black Lake sturgeon was almost decimated quite a few years ago. We knew that just through the chat in the community. People would go over there with pitchforks. When a sturgeon's on their beds having sex, that's all they can think about. They are so focused on this, they're just open to any kind of, people can stand around the bank next to them and hit them with a pitchfork.
Yeah, they're very vulnerable.
Thank you so much, Dave.
Okay.
That was great.
All right. Okay, thanks. For the sturgeon,